Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Climate Week, or Happy Climate Week to everyone. I am here to talk to you about a policy near and dear to my heart in the New York State Legislature. I am carrying the bill for the Just Energy Transition Act, an exceptionally important bill to help us meet our climate goals. So, as everyone knows, we are here in Climate Week acknowledging that we have 6.5 years left to reach what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says we must reach in 6.5 years in order to prevent the worst of the climate change predictions, and that is that we must reduce our total global greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. The only way, of course, we're going to do this is if everyone plays their part. So a couple years ago, New York State passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and that piece of legislation set very clear goals. So by 2030, again, 6.5 years, we will reduce the fossil fuel base for our energy grid in New York State by 70%. And by 2040, we will have an energy grid that has zero emissions. Part of the CLCPA was to establish a commission to create a scoping plan that will create the framework or the pathway to get to those goals. It's one thing to, of course, have aspirations. It's important to create the actual plan to reach those goals. So the Just Energy Transition Act specifically targets one of the greatest contributors of emissions in New York State, which is the fossil fuel power plants or the fossil fuel generation facilities. The purpose of this particular bill is to create a plan and then implement a plan to transition the most heavy fossil fuel based, the most polluting generation facilities to renewable energy infrastructure. So do a complete reversal to create a solution from an existing problem. There are multiple mechanisms, but the ultimate goal is to create a phase out of at least 4 gigawatts of fossil fuel generation statewide throughout our generation facilities. The intention is to prioritize energy efficiency, environmental justice, and emissions reductions, all three, super important. So the first phase of this piece of legislation is to establish the study. The study is supposed to be done by the PSC, or the Public Service Commission, in concert with NYSERDA and DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation. And I'm going to outline the specific components of the study that are very important. First of all is to create a plan for the state's electricity system reliance on fossil fuels. So that's the first, to establish the transition and identify, of course, that we need technology to do that. The second is to provide guidance to establish a competitive program to promote the private sector investments in eligible technology. Of course, this needs to be done as private-public partnership in order to reach these goals. The state is not able to do it all ourselves, although we did recently pass a bill that would require that the state pick up where there is shortcomings in the private sector or the market to reach these goals, so that we guarantee that we will reach them. But this is to create the framework to support that, so to create the competitive program. The third is to provide guidance to ensure significant environmental, health, and other benefits to disadvantaged communities. Disadvantaged communities across New York State are the ones who contributed to climate change the least, but the ones who have been the most impacted, very often because these facilities, the power plants, are in their communities, polluting the air and the water in their communities, while the rest of the state benefits. So this specifically is supposed to target addressing that and prioritizing their benefit. The fourth is that it needs to have significant potential for job creation and retention, economic development, and a just transition opportunity benefiting New Yorkers and the state's workforce. And there are clear outline details in this to guarantee that, which I will get to in a moment. And the last is to ensure the availability of assistance under the Electric Generation Facility Cessation Mitigation Fund to any local government entity that is impacted by the replacement and redevelopment of fossil fuel generation facilities. So holding them harmless. Of course, when you're closing down a facility or you're transitioning, there's very often a loss of jobs, a loss of income, a loss of tax revenue, all of those things. This is designed to mitigate that. So after that study is established, we get the draft, there's a public comment period, and from the public comment period, the PSC will take that information, adjust the draft, incorporate that information, create the final draft, and that will go to the governor, the president of the Senate, and the Speaker of the Assembly. At that point, the bill also establishes a mechanism for implementation, and that would be requiring the Department of Public Service, along with the Long Island Power Authority and the Department of Environmental Conservation, to outline the strategies, programs, and standards to implement the study. There's also a sister component of that the Public Service Commission will commence proceedings to implement those strategies, programs, standards, and requirements. Again, completely in line with the study that's established. The PSC will also issue an order directing the New York State Energy Research and Developmental Authority, that's NYPA, to implement a competitive award process, as I discussed earlier, to facilitate the replacement. So right from the study, once the study is delivered, then the bill outlines the implementation phase. There's a few last keynotes that are really important to keep in mind about this bill, and this is what I love about how thorough it is. The bill specifically requires that any project incorporate project labor agreements. Those are agreements made before the project is done with unions, with labor, to make sure that it meets those standards of supporting labor workforce. The bill also requires the Commissioner of Labor, in consultation with labor organizations, to develop a comprehensive plan to transition, train, and retrain employees that are impacted by these projects and this transition, so that they aren't left behind. It also requires that the Commission of Labor create a program where applicable and feasible, that newly created job opportunities are offered to a pool of transitioning workers who've lost their employment. So again, ensuring that we retain that employment and that we retain stability. The last piece of that is that no civil service public employee can lose their job or have their title or duties transferred. So preserving all public employees. And the last is that Long Island will follow suit and establish programs for the Long Island Power Authority. So this bill creates a study, the mechanism, specifically ensuring that the environmental justice component is met, that it ensures grid reliability, that it retains jobs, and ensures that the communities where transitions are happening are supported. Very thorough piece of legislation, very thorough roadmap to transition one of the greatest emitters of methane and carbon dioxide and other pollutants into the air of all of the industries that we have in the state. We will not reach our climate goals unless this roadmap is implemented. So hopefully you will all remember this name, Just Energy Transition Act. And the bill is in the Assembly and the Senate and ready to go. Just needs everyone's support. I will be fighting for this come January, and hopefully I will see you all in Albany. Thank you again for joining for Climate Week. Such an important initiative for us to focus our energy on. I can't think of anything better right now than for all of us to be putting our heart, blood, and soul into making sure that we do not reach the climate change impacts that are being predicted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.